Having achieved full control over the legislative and executive branches of government, Hitler and his allies began to suppress the remaining opposition. The Social Democratic Party was made illegal and its assets were seized. While many trade union delegates were in Berlin for May Day activities, SS stormtroopers occupied union offices around the country. On the 2nd of May 1933, all trade unions were forced to dissolve and their leaders were arrested. Some were sent to concentration camps. The German Labor Front was formed as an umbrella organization to represent all workers, administrators, and company owners, thus reflecting the concept of Nazism in the spirit of Hitler's Volksgemeinschaft, people's community. By the end of June, the other parties had been intimidated into disbanding. This included the Nazis' nominal coalition partner, the DNVP. With the SA's help, Hitler forced its leader, Hindenburg, to resign on the 29th of June. On the 14th of July 1933, the Nazi Party was declared the only legal political party in Germany. The demands of the SA for more political and military power caused anxiety among military, industrial, and political leaders. In response, Hitler purged the entire SA leadership in the Night of the Long Knives, which took place from 30th of June to 2nd of July 1934. Hitler targeted Ernst Röhm and other SA leaders who, along with a number of Hitler's political adversaries, such as Gregor Strasser and former Chancellor Kurt von Schleicher, were rounded up, arrested, and shot, 177. While the international community and some Germans were shocked by the killings, many in Germany believed Hitler was restoring order. Hindenburg died on the 2nd of August 1934. On the previous day, the cabinet had enacted the law concerning the head of state of the German Reich. This law stated that upon Hindenburg's death, the office of president would be abolished and its powers merged with those of the chancellor. Hitler thus became head of state as well as head of government and was formally named as Führer und Reichskanzler, leader and chancellor of the Reich, although Reichskanzler was eventually dropped. With this action, Hitler eliminated the last legal remedy by which he could be removed from office. As head of state, Hitler became commander-in-chief of the armed forces. Immediately after Hindenburg's death, at the instigation of the leadership of the Reichswehr, the traditional loyalty oath of soldiers was altered to affirm loyalty to Hitler personally, by name, rather than to the office of commander-in-chief, which was later renamed to Supreme Commander, or the state. On the 19th of August, the merger of the presidency with the chancellorship was approved by 88% of the electorate voting in a plebiscite. In early 1938, Hitler used blackmail to consolidate his hold over the military by instigating the Blomberg-Fritsch affair. Hitler forced his war minister, Field Marshal Werner von Blomberg, to resign by using a police dossier that showed that Blomberg's new wife had a record for prostitution. Army Commander Colonel General Werner von Fritsch was removed after the Schutzstaffel, SS, produced allegations that he had engaged in a homosexual relationship. Both men had fallen into disfavor because they objected to Hitler's demand to make the Wehrmacht ready for war as early as 1938. Hitler assumed Blomberg's title of Commander-in-Chief, thus taking personal command of the armed forces. He replaced the Ministry of War with the Oberkommando der Wehrmacht, OKW, headed by General Wilhelm Keitel. On the same day, 16 generals were stripped of their commands and 44 more were transferred. All were suspected of not being sufficiently pro-Nazi. By early February 1938, 12 more generals had been removed. Hitler took care to give his dictatorship the appearance of legality. Many of his decrees were explicitly based on the Reichstag Fire Decree and hence on Article 48 of the Weimar Constitution. The Reichstag renewed the Enabling Act twice, each time for a 4-year period. While elections to the Reichstag were still held in 1933, 1936, and 1938, voters were presented with a single list of Nazis and pro-Nazi guests, which received well over 90% of the vote. These sham elections were held in far from secret conditions. The Nazis threatened severe reprisals against anyone who did not vote or who voted against. In August 1934, Hitler appointed Reichsbank President Hjalmar Schacht as Minister of Economics, and in the following year as Plenipotentiary for War Economy, in charge of preparing the economy for war. Reconstruction and rearmament were financed through NEFO bills, printing money, and seizing the assets of people arrested as enemies of the state, including Jews. The number of unemployed fell from 6 million in 1932 to fewer than 1 million in 1936. Hitler oversaw one of the largest infrastructure improvement campaigns in German history, leading to the construction of dams, autobahns, railroads, and other civil works. Wages were slightly lower in the mid to late 1930s compared with wages during the Weimar Republic, while the cost of living increased by 25%. The average work week increased during the shift to a war economy. By 1939, the average German was working between 47 and 50 hours a week. Hitler's government sponsored architecture on an immense scale. Albert Speer, instrumental in implementing Hitler's classicist reinterpretation of German culture, was placed in charge of the proposed architectural renovations of Berlin. Despite a threatened multi-nation boycott, Germany hosted the 1936 Olympic Games. Hitler officiated at the opening ceremonies and attended events at both the Winter Games in Garmisch-Partenkirchen and the Summer Games in Berlin. In a meeting with German military leaders on the 3rd of February 1933, Hitler spoke of conquest for Lebensraum in the East and its ruthless Germanization as his ultimate foreign policy objectives. In March, Prince Bernhard Wilhelm von Bülow, secretary at the Foreign Office, Auswärtiges Amt, issued a statement of major foreign policy aims. Anschluss with Austria, the restoration of Germany's national borders of 1914, rejection of military restrictions under the Treaty of Versailles, the return of the former German colonies in Africa, and a German zone of influence in Eastern Europe. Hitler found Bülow's goals to be too modest. In speeches during this period, he stressed the peaceful goals of his policies and a willingness to work within international agreements. At the first meeting of his cabinet in 1933, Hitler prioritized military spending over unemployment relief. Germany withdrew from the League of Nations and the World Disarmament Conference in October 1933. In January 1935, over 90% of the people of the Saarland, then under League of Nations administration, voted to unite with Germany. That March, Hitler announced an expansion of the Wehrmacht to 600,000 members, 6 times the number permitted by the Versailles Treaty, including development of an air force, Luftwaffe, and an increase in the size of the Navy, Kriegsmarine. Britain, France, Italy, and the League of Nations condemned these violations of the treaty, but did nothing to stop it. The Anglo-German Naval Agreement, AGNA, of 18th of June allowed German tonnage to increase to 35% of that of the British Navy. Hitler called the signing of the AGNA the happiest day of his life, believing that the agreement marked the beginning of the Anglo-German alliance he had predicted in Mein Kampf. France and Italy were not consulted before the signing, directly undermining the League of Nations and setting the Treaty of Versailles on the path towards irrelevance.